Your phone just did something you'll never actually see happen right now, sitting quietly in your pocket, screen off. An app you've probably never opened on purpose, just checked your location, read through your contact list, and quietly sent a small packet of data to a server sitting in a country you've never visited, and you didn't approve that specific action. You don't even remember granting that specific permission. And yet, it just happened anyway. This isn't a conspiracy theory or a scary story made up for views. This is exactly the pattern the FBI laid out in a formal public service announcement, and it's real enough that federal investigators felt the need to put their name on it and warn the entire country about it directly. So in this video, I want to walk you through exactly what the FBI actually said, why Android phones specifically are more exposed to this than iPhones, and the precise practical steps you can take tonight to lock this down. Because the goal here isn't to scare you into throwing your phone in a lake. It's to give you the real actionable picture so you can actually protect yourself with facts instead of panic. So let's start with what actually happened, because this is genuinely worth understanding in its own words rather than through a scary headline. In early spring of this year, the FBI issued an official public service announcement released through its Internet Crime Complaint Center, specifically addressing what it called data security risks associated with foreign developed mobile applications frequently used across the United States. And right there in the announcement itself, the Bureau made a point of saying these concerns aren't limited to just one country or one specific app. They explicitly said these risks are global in nature, and here's the core concern the FBI laid out in plain language. Apps developed or maintained by companies based in certain high-risk foreign countries can be legally required, under those countries' own national security and data laws, to hand over user data to their government if asked. And critically, this isn't a request the company gets to refuse. In many of these jurisdictions, there's no warrant required, no independent judicial oversight process, and no legal path for the company to say no, even if it wanted to protect its users. And the specific categories of data the FBI flagged as being at risk include your contacts, your precise location history, and your photos, all of which can potentially end up stored on servers physically located overseas, entirely outside the reach of protections you might normally assume apply to your personal data. And here's a detail from that warning that genuinely surprised a lot of people who read it closely. The FBI specifically noted that you don't even need to personally use one of these apps to be affected by this. If someone else has your phone number and information saved in their own contacts, and they use an app that uploads their entire contact list to a foreign server, your information can get swept up into that same data collection process too, entirely without your knowledge or consent, meaning one single person's decision to grant broad permissions to an app can quietly ripple outward and affect dozens, sometimes hundreds of other people connected to them. And that's genuinely worth sitting with for a second, because it means your own personal privacy. Habits aren't the only thing determining your actual exposure here. The habits of everyone who has your contact information saved matter too. And that's precisely why this problem is so much bigger and harder to fully control than simply being careful about what you personally download. Now let's talk about why. This risk specifically hits Android users harder than iPhone users because the FBI's own guidance draws a direct distinction here. And understanding the actual technical reason why matters, because it changes what you specifically need to watch for on your device. Android as an operating system is built around a considerably more open ecosystem than iOS, and one of the direct consequences of that openness is something called sideloading, which simply means installing an app from somewhere other than the official Google Play Store, maybe a direct download link someone sent you, a third-party app marketplace, or a file shared through a messaging app. And sideloading is genuinely easy to do on Android. Sometimes it only takes a single tap in confirming a permission prompt, and that ease of use is a real convenience in plenty of legitimate situations. But it's also exactly how a huge amount of malware infected and data harvesting apps end up installed on people's phones in the first place. Because when you download something through the official Google Play Store, that app goes through an automated and sometimes manual security scanning process before it's ever made available to you, specifically designed to catch malicious code, hidden backdoors, and apps requesting permissions that don't match what they claim to actually do. And when you sideload an app instead, you're completely skipping that entire protective screening layer. You're trusting the app is safe based purely on where you got the link or file from, and Google has actually started rolling out stricter measures specifically to reduce this exact risk, including new blocks aimed at making it harder to install apps directly from unknown, unverified developers outside the official store. But if you already have apps sitting on your phone right now that didn't come through the Play Store, that protective update doesn't retroactively make those existing apps safe. They're still sitting there with whatever permissions and behavior they were originally installed with. And the FBI's warning specifically flagged that foreign developed apps in particular may contain hidden malware capable of bypassing your normal permission settings. exploiting known weaknesses in how the operating system handles background processes, and installing what are called backdoors, meaning a hidden secondary access point that lets whoever built the app quietly get deeper access to your device later, potentially well beyond what you ever knowingly agreed to when you first installed it. And I want to walk through the specific behaviors the FBI pointed to, because these are exactly the warning signs worth understanding and actually watching for on your own device. The first is background data collection. And this means an app continuing to gather information about you even when you're not actively using it at all, screen off, app closed, sitting untouched, in your pocket, and still quietly working in the background. And this is genuinely hard to detect just by looking at your phone, because there's no persistent notification telling you this is happening. It simply happens silently unless you go digging specifically for it. The second is what's sometimes called permission abuse. And this is when an app requests access to something that has absolutely no logical connection to what the app actually claims to do. Think of a simple flashlight app asking for access to your contacts, and precise location, or a basic photo editing tool asking for permission to read your text messages. There's no legitimate functional reason those specific permissions should be necessary for those specific tasks. And when you see that kind of mismatch, that's a genuine, concrete red flag worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as normal. And the third is the malware and hidden backdoor risk we already touched on. Apps that are either deliberately built with hidden malicious code from the very beginning, or apps that get compromised later through an update that quietly introduces malicious functionality that wasn't there when you originally installed it, which is actually one of the sneakier variations of this threat, because an app can look and behave perfectly safely for months, build up your trust completely, and then receive a routine seeming update that quietly adds harmful new capabilities, and you'd have essentially no way of noticing that shift just from using the app normally day to day. So now let's actually get into the concrete steps you can take starting tonight, because understanding the problem is only half of what actually matters here. The other half is doing something real about it. So let's walk through this properly, step by step. First, go through every single app currently installed on your phone, and I mean an actual honest audit, not a quick glance. Open your phone's full app list and ask yourself genuinely, when's the last time I actually opened this? If the honest answer is months ago, or you genuinely can't even remember installing it in the first place, delete it. Every single unused app sitting on your phone is a potential ongoing data source quietly running in the background, and it's providing you zero actual benefit in exchange for whatever access it currently has to your device. Second, and this is specifically what the FBI's own guidance recommends directly, avoid installing anything outside of official app. Stores entirely resist sideloading unless you have a very specific, well understood, and genuinely necessary reason to do so. And if you do have apps currently installed that came from outside the Play Store, seriously reconsider whether you actually need to keep them at all. Third, before you install anything new going forward, actually pause and read through what permissions that app is requesting during setup, rather than reflexively tapping allow on every single prompt out of habit just to get through the setup process. Faster, ask yourself honestly whether the specific permission being requested actually makes logical sense for what that app claims to do. A weather app asking for your general location makes complete sense. A weather app asking for access to your contacts and your microphone does not. Fourth, go into your phone's privacy settings directly and review exactly which apps currently have access to your contacts, your precise location, your camera, and your microphone. On most Android phones, this lives under Settings, then Privacy, then Permission Manager, and this single screen will show you every app grouped by permission type, letting you quickly scan for anything that looks disproportionate or unnecessary, given what that specific app is actually supposed to do. And if you find something that clearly doesn't need a permission it currently has, revoke that. Specific access, immediately. You don't have to delete the entire app to do this. You can often simply turn off one specific permission, while keeping the app itself functional for whatever legitimate purpose you actually use it for. Fifth, specifically for location access, and this is genuinely one of the most impactful individual changes you can make. Check which apps currently have location access set to always versus only while using the app, and switch anything that doesn't have a clear, obvious, ongoing need for constant tracking down to the more limited while using option, or turn it off completely if the app doesn't need location data at all to function properly. Sixth, disable unnecessary data sharing wherever you find the option available. And this is actually a direct quote from the FBI's own guidance, because many apps include separate, often buried settings specifically for sharing your usage data with advertising partners, analytics companies, or other third parties entirely beyond the basic core function of the app itself. And these settings are frequently turned on by default without you ever being clearly asked or even properly notified. Seventh, keep your phone's software updated regularly. because security updates specifically patch known vulnerabilities that malicious apps and bad actors can otherwise exploit to gain unauthorized access to your device, and delaying these updates for weeks or months at a time leaves known publicly documented security holes sitting open on your phone that a properly updated device would already have closed. Eighth, and this one applies specifically to the international data risk the FBI's warning centers on. Be especially thoughtful and deliberate about which apps you use for messaging, video, and social sharing, particularly ones developed by companies based in countries where those companies could be legally compelled to hand your data over to a foreign government. Without any independent judicial oversight process at all, this doesn't necessarily mean you need to delete every single app with any foreign connection whatsoever. That's genuinely not a realistic or proportionate response, but it does mean being aware of exactly what data a given app has access to, and being more conservative and restrictive with the permissions you grant to apps specifically falling into this higher risk category. Ninth, consider using a reputable antivirus or mobile security app specifically, designed to actively scan for malware, flag genuinely suspicious background behavior, and alert you to unusual permission requests you might otherwise miss entirely on your own. This isn't a strict requirement for basic phone safety, but it does add a meaningful additional layer of protection, especially if you're someone who installs a fairly wide range of different apps regularly, or if you occasionally do need to sideload something for a specific legitimate reason. 10th, and this is honestly one of the simplest and most overlooked steps available to you, actually periodically read through the terms of service or end user license agreement before installing a new app. And I understand that sounds tedious, and genuinely nobody reads the entire document line by line in practice, but even skimming the sections specifically covering data collection and third-party sharing can reveal genuinely important information that most people never bother to check even once before installing something. And now I want to address something important and be completely fair and balanced about this, because there's a version of this story that can easily tip over into pure fear-mongering if it's not handled carefully and responsibly, and that's not genuinely useful or helpful to you. The FBI's warning, read in full and in its actual original context, is fundamentally about broad categories of risk and general behavior patterns to watch for. It deliberately does not name a single specific app that you absolutely must delete tonight or face some kind of immediate dire consequence. The Bureau's own announcement is intentionally general in scope, and various media outlets covering the story afterward have made their own individual, sometimes fairly speculative, guesses about exactly which specific popular apps might be implicated by the broader warning. But the FBI itself has been notably careful and consistent about not naming specific apps directly in its official public communications. So if you see a headline or a video or a social media post claiming with total absolute certainty that one very specific named app is definitely, unambiguously, the exact hidden surveillance tool the FBI meant, treat that particular claim with a healthy, appropriate degree of skepticism, because that level of specific certainty simply isn't fully supported by what the FBI actually officially said in its own announcement. What is genuinely and clearly supported is the broader pattern the Bureau described: foreign developed apps operating under legal systems that can compel data sharing with limited or no independent oversight, apps requesting permissions that don't logically match their actual stated function, and background data collection happening well beyond what most users are even remotely aware of. And that broader pattern is exactly what you should actually be watching for across your entire phone as a whole, rather than fixating narrowly on one single specific app, while potentially overlooking several other legitimate concerns sitting elsewhere on your device. And I think it's also worth stepping back and offering some genuinely reassuring context here too, because none of this means every single app on your phone is secretly spying on you, or that you need to go into full-blown panic mode and delete your entire phone's contents tonight. The vast, overwhelming majority of apps on the Play Store operate completely legitimately, request only the permissions they genuinely need to properly function, and don't engage in any of these concerning behaviors the FBI specifically flagged in its warning at all. The actual realistic goal here is thoughtful, informed awareness combined with a bit of periodic housekeeping, not blanket. Indiscriminate paranoia toward every single app you've ever downloaded. And honestly, most of the meaningful protection here comes down to just a handful of consistent, simple habits. Actually reviewing your app permissions every so often instead of setting them once and forgetting about them for years. Deleting apps you genuinely don't use anymore rather than letting them accumulate indefinitely. Being appropriately more cautious, specifically with apps. Requesting permissions that clearly don't logically match their stated function. And avoiding sideloading unless you have a specific, well-understood, and genuinely necessary reason for doing so. And if you build just those habits into your normal routine going forward, you're genuinely covering the overwhelming majority of what this entire FBI warning was actually trying to communicate to the public in the first place. And I want to leave you with one final thought that I think is genuinely the most useful, practical takeaway from this entire story. Your phone has quietly become the single most information-dense device you own. More personal data lives inside it than in almost any other single object in your daily life. Your location history, your private conversations, your photos, your daily contacts and habits, and treating the permissions you grant to the apps sitting on that device with real, genuine seriousness isn't overreacting or being unnecessarily paranoid. It's simply proportionate, sensible care for something that quietly holds an enormous amount of your personal life inside it. So tonight, before you do anything else, take just 10 actual minutes, go through your full app list, delete anything you genuinely don't use anymore, check your permission manager for anything requesting access that doesn't logically make sense given what that app actually does, and switch any unnecessary location permissions currently set to always down to only while using the app. That's genuinely the real, practical, non-panicked version of what the FBI's warning is actually asking you to go do if this helped. You understand what's actually behind this story instead of just the scary headline version of it? Hit subscribe, because we're going to keep breaking down real security warnings like this one clearly and honestly as they continue coming out. See you in the next one.